Welcome to Consortium News Live. I'm Elizabeth Voss. Virginia Giuffre was one of the most prominent and well-known of the Jeffrey Epstein trafficking survivors to come forward publicly. Her memoir, titled Nobody's Girl, was published on the 21st of October. Earlier this year, Giuffre died in what has been described as a suicide. Jeffrey Epstein was an infamous financier who died under suspicious circumstances, allegedly again by suicide, while in prison in 2019 when he was charged with sex trafficking minors. Epstein's co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell, was convicted of charges relating to sex trafficking minors, for which she was then sentenced to 20 years in prison. Giuffre's book provides a gut-wrenching view into the sexual commodification of children by Epstein, with Giuffre alleging organized abuse in multiple countries over a period of years by perpetrators named and unnamed, in addition to Epstein and Maxwell. These included former Prince Andrew, who was stripped of his titles by his brother, King Charles, shortly after the book's publication. Giuffre gives an account of being severely abused and beaten to the point that she feared for her life by an unnamed, quote, prime minister, who many assert referred to Ehud Barak, Israel's former prime minister and former head of intelligence. She was also tasked with inducting minors into the abuse ring run by Epstein and Maxwell. Leaked emails have shed additional light on Epstein's relationship with Ehud Barak. Dropsite News reports that hacked emails revealed Epstein used his political network and financial resources to help broker a security cooperation agreement between the government of Israel and Mongolia. Another Dropsite News report revealed that Epstein and Ehud Barak tried to engineer a Russian-led solution to remove Syria's Bashar al-Assad to benefit Israel. Newly unsealed court documents have also provided information regarding the relationship between Epstein and Wall Street bankers like Jess Staley, a former top official at JP Morgan Bank, as well as Leon Black. CNN reports that in 2021, Jess Staley, quote, resigned as head of Barclays Bank following media scrutiny over his long relationship with Epstein, and that, quote, this year, Staley said he didn't know about Epstein's involvement with underage girls, but admitted in court that he had had sex with one of Epstein's assistants. Among the pages are emails between Epstein and Staley, with Epstein suggesting he could set up meetings for Staley to recruit new clients, including the co-founders of Google and heads of nations. None of the individuals named were accused of any wrongdoing. One last quote from CNN. One of the biggest Wall Street names mentioned on the list of transactions on 2019 suspicious activity reports is Leon Black, a longtime associate of Epstein, who has maintained that Epstein gave him only financial advice. So banks, including JP Morgan and Bank of America, have paid large sums to Epstein victims as a result of numerous lawsuits, though they have admitted no wrongdoing. There's also the ongoing battle in the US to release the Epstein files. And joining us to discuss all of these developments today is investigative journalist and author Nick Bryant, who was the first to publish Epstein's Little Black Book and who wrote The Franklin Scandal. He is the host of the Nick Bryant podcast and the director of Epstein Justice at epsteinjustice.com. Nick, thank you for joining us.
Well, I'm glad to be with you, Elizabeth. I haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I wanted to start off, obviously, with Virginia's book. Can you talk about that? Was there anything that surprised you or new information? What did you think of it?
Virginia's book was devastating. I thought it was going to be devastating, but I had no idea of how devastating it was going to be. Yeah. And because I got to know Virginia, we never met face to face, but we certainly talked and exchanged emails. She was an amazing person. If you look back at the trauma and the abuse that started so young in her life, and she was like a supernova. She just exploded and illuminated all these little dark corners.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah, in the book, she talks about abuse that started very early in her own home, which, as she describes in the book, she didn't really go into that much in the media during her life. That's kind of new information, I think, for most people.
For me, it is too. I had no idea that her father started molesting her when she was 6 years old.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's so beyond horrific.
Oh, definitely. And the way that she didn't get any help from anyone at the time or afterwards, even when she was in that institutional setting, and I think it was called Growing Together, and she tried to speak out about some teenage boys raping her, and
Right.
she was basically just dismissed.
Well, her father also let a friend of his
Hmm.
molest Virginia, and that happens quite a bit. People don't really understand when you get into those kind of dynamics. The kid is often shuffled around to various pedophiles.
Right.
And then she did end up in, I think it was called Well Together.
Okay.
And their goal was to completely deconstruct the kid and
Hmm.
then build the kid back up. But as we found out with treatment centers for drugs and alcohol, people that go to the treatment centers are broken down enough. You don't need to break them down any further. You just have to start building them up. And I was surprised that that place had embraced the break them down belief because it's pretty antiquated as far as treating kids today with any kind of chemical dependency. And I think that Virginia probably had some chemical dependency issues.
Yeah, and she's open about that, that she was acting out a little bit wild at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, who wouldn't be after going through the things that she had been through? In light of her book, I mean, a lot of people on social media have raised questions about her death. She obviously passed away in April of this year. What do you make of those questions? What's the context that may be missing in those questions?
Well, I really dug into her death and I wrote a article called Requiem for Virginia Giuffre. And I looked at her final days and it was very obvious to me she had been through so much abuse and so much trauma. And then her husband was severely beating her up. I mean, severe. There's that picture of her, and it was originally written off as a crash into a school bus, but that's not the case. That was her husband really beating her up, and she had tried to commit suicide a couple of twice the preceding year, and I think that her husband beating her up was just the critical mass of trauma that ultimately drove her to commit suicide. I do believe that she committed suicide. Her brother and sister in law believe that she committed suicide. I saw her father being interviewed saying that he didn't believe she committed suicide, but her father turns out to be a very malevolent, dubious individual, someone that shouldn't be listened to. And he probably wanted to get some money for that appearance.
Exactly. I mean, Virginia in the book even talks about her father potentially having taken money from Epstein to allow him to abuse her at the very beginning of her relationship with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
Now, I've heard that from another source too. So I do believe
Yeah.
that Epstein gave her father money and just to go away. And that's what he did. And her mother must have known what was going on. How could you not know what's going on? And she was let down by her mother. But what I was really stirred by in her book was she tried to establish relationships with both her father and her mother.
Repeatedly.
And
Yeah.
and I had a difficult childhood. The first time I ran away, I was 12 years old. My stepfather was very violent, and I'm really glad I didn't get too far the first time because a lot of bad things can happen to you when you're 12. But I was able to kind of reconcile with my mother and stepfather, but I didn't go through the lengths that she did to try to reconcile. And what her parents had done to her was far more vicious than what my mother and stepfather had done to me. But I was amazed that she had a really good heart. Virginia had a really good heart, and it was just buried under a lot of trauma.
Yeah, I believe in reference to that picture of her and the reference to a bus crash, why was that posted on social media in reference to a bus crash if it was an incident of domestic violence? Do you have any idea?
Okay, what happened was she had been in a bus crash, and it
Okay.
wasn't that bad of a crash. And she had gone to a hospital for like, she'd spent one night at a hospital. And then she got out, and I think within a week, she tried to make contact with her kids, and her husband just beat her up really badly. And the picture that we saw of Virginia being bruised and battered was the picture that she took while she was in the hospital after being beat up by her. And I think that she was really reluctant to show people that picture and to be honest about it too. I, and when you read her book, she was sent to Thailand to essentially purchase a kid and take massage classes. And she had recruited underage girls before, and that's part of the go in a situation like that. It's called scavenging. And most of the kids will do that, will scavenge for other kids. They get paid. And what people don't really understand either is Epstein was a cult. I mean, that was a cult. And Epstein was the grand poobah. And people like Epstein and Maxwell are virtuosos at sizing up the victims, seeing where their traumas are, seeing what their dreams are, and working on both of them. And with the Franklin scandal, it was the same type of thing, where kids that were already getting abused that were part of that cult. And I'm not saying a cult, I'm just saying it was kind of, networks like that are kind of like a cult. And the kids in the Franklin network, they were scavenging too, or a lot of them were scavenging, and they would get like $200 or $300 per kid that they were able to bring back. So that's a very common thing in child trafficking networks, is to get the kids to scavenge for other kids.
Yeah, Virginia talks about that in her book, and she says it's something that she deeply regretted. Definitely. She also talks about, I mean, she talks about abuse by many of Epstein's friends. He talks about men from the tech world, science, and an unnamed prime minister who beat her severely. I know on Twitter you said that Virginia had told you that Ehud Barak had put her into the hospital. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Well, there was some very violent pedophiles in the Epstein network, and it's the same thing with the Franklin network. They were very violent. Some of these guys, that's how they get off, is beating up little girls or little boys. And Virginia that said that he had put her in the hospital for 3 days, and that there wouldn't be any records of it, of course, but that's how violent. And she was very frightened. She was very frightened of two perps, Ehud Barak, because of his connections to the Mossad or Israeli intelligence, and Les Wexner because of his connections to the mafia.
That's
And,
interesting. Yeah.
and I wrote an article a long time ago that where I really showed that Les Wexner was heavily integrated into the mob.
Do you want to talk a little bit about those connections?
Wexner was heavily involved with, I believe it was the Genovese crime family.
Mm.
He used Walsh Trucking to move all the goods from Albrands. And Walsh Trucking was heavily integrated into organized crime.
Yeah.
And then there was also Southern Air Transport, which had been a CIA proprietary airline that Wexner had moved up to Rickenbacker Air Force Base in Ohio. So, but Virginia was much more concerned about Wexner's mafia connections than her CIA or intelligence connections.
Yeah, I noticed that in the book she really doesn't talk about intelligence at all and barely mentions blackmail. She kind of describes Epstein as trading girls and for sex with these men as kind of favors. So kind of hinting at blackmail, but she doesn't go into it very much. She does mention surveillance a couple of times, but that's about it, I noticed.
I think that she was on a very short leash as far as what you could say, because there were some things that I know about her life that I thought that she would probably go a little deeper into. But I think that because of potential litigation, Knopf decided not to include a number of the things in her story.
Yeah, I mean, even the book itself, I mean, obviously she doesn't name Barack, she doesn't name Wexner that I remember. And even when her ghostwriter has gone on a media tour promoting the book, the ghostwriter is not willing to say any names. Again, probably, with issues of litigation and whatnot. But as you've said in previous interviews with us on CN, uh, Virginia has named names in lots of litigation, depositions. So we do know what a lot of those names are. Obviously, we've already mentioned Ehud Barak and Leslie Wexner. Can you remind us, for those people who didn't watch the other interviews, a few more of the names that she has named publicly?
They're Glenn Dubin, the billionaire, Leon Black, the billionaire, uh, Bruce King, the former governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico, who is actually Clinton's energy czar, George Mitchell, who was the Senate Majority Leader uh, for the Democrats for a number of years. And there's a number of scientists that she mentions, like Marvin Minsky. So Epstein really pandered her to a lot of different people. And she had, the thing about Virginia is she had been at that really horrible place that her parents had somehow sent her to, because it didn't seem like they had a lot of money, and it seemed like that place required some money.
The juvenile detention facility. Yeah.
Yeah. And because I think it was a private detention facility. So I don't know how her parents afforded that, given that they were both alcoholics and their employment was pretty spotty. But anyway, after she ran away from that place, she was picked up by Ron Eppinger, who was a pedophilic pimp. And he essentially rented an apartment for her, and pedophiles would be like a conveyor belt of pedophiles. And then after that, the FBI caught on to him, and then he gave Virginia to a friend of his. And the FBI did a pre-dawn raid on her new pimp, and she was in bed with him, and brought her they brought her to the police station, and her family agreed to take her back, which and then her father was a maintenance man at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's resort, and then she got a job at Mar-a-Lago, and that's where she was recruited by Maxwell.
Yeah.
And they did not need. The thing about it is with, and I found this out with the Franklin scandal. You cannot take a kid off the streets and put them in a setting, a sexual setting with like a senator. They have to be conditioned. And in the Franklin scandal, Boys Town did that and conditioned a lot of those kids so they could be put in rooms with the rich and the powerful. But Virginia had already been conditioned. And it wasn't very difficult for Epstein and Maxwell to completely enslave her psychologically.
And by conditioning, you're talking about that grooming process
Yeah,
into accepting sexual abuse and also just going along with it essentially.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And not only that, but um kind of what Virginia seems to describe is just being willing to do anything, and that was something that Epstein really valued, and that's one reason that he was willing to take her on all these international trips so quickly, was that he sort of trusted her in a way.
Well, she'd already been groomed, and Epstein didn't have to put a lot of energy into that.
Yeah.
And Maxwell, and I think that was why they incorporated her like they did. And the thing about Epstein giving her father money is really troubling. And I was shocked about that. She had never mentioned the incest, and she alluded to abuse very early on, but she'd never mentioned the incest directly to me. And her father, the way that he sold her out to Jeffrey Epstein was beyond abhorrent. And I know someone whose mother sold them. She grew up in New Orleans, and she was like 17, and her mother sold her to an older guy, and she was 17 years old, and she ran away to New York City. She was quite beautiful, and she became a model. But that type of stuff happens, and people don't get that families that are that sick don't have any difficulties really pandering their kids out to other pedophiles. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
And when you look at the numbers, according to the Centers for Disease Control, 25% of underage girls have been molested and 5% of underage boys. And people in the field believe that that's slightly conservative for underage girls, and it's very conservative for underage boys. There has been a study that found that 16% of underage boys were molested. I don't think it's that high. But if you just go with the CDC numbers, as conservative as they are, you've got over 50 million Americans
Yeah.
that have been molested when they were underage. And most of those molestations are done in the home. And a lot of times the father will pander the child, and a lot of times the sibling will pander the child, or certainly introduce the child to his or her friends. So that's an integral part of our society that we need to fix.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to child pornography, that people who collect child pornography will often be making it themselves, swapping it with others. It's part of what they do. It's awful. Um, one
There
of the
were
Go
in
ahead.
last year, our there's millions of hours of child abuse material on the internet, and last year I believe there were 1,435 people that were incarcerated for either making or disseminating child abuse material. So that if you look at all the child abuse material that's being made, and you look at that number, it's a fraction of 1%, or I believe it's a fraction of 1%.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one of the things that really struck me when I was reading Virginia's book, just to follow up on the general topic, is that, as we said earlier, she was walking a tightrope in writing this, that she wanted to say what she could say, but only to a certain point for her and her children's safety. Um, and what I got from that was the difficulty survivors in general have in coming forward to tell their story, not only because, I mean, of the just legal repercussions of accusations of defamation, but just the societal backlash as well. She talked in her book about how she was attacked repeatedly, the effect that had on her mental health. She talks about a couple of suicide attempts in the book. And so what do you say to people who are okay, or who have participated to whatever degree in tearing her down, in for example, attacking things like her previous text that she wrote a few years earlier that she said was fictionalized, stuff like that. Can you discuss that a little bit?
There was a federal district court judge. His name is Patrick Schills. And prior to him becoming a judge, he had litigated 500 molestation lawsuits on behalf of various Catholic dioceses. And he was interviewed about that. And of those 500 cases, he felt like 10 were lying. So that's 2%. And why would someone go forward? I mean, and I don't deny that people come forward and accuse people of sexual abuse when they haven't been abused. But I think that Judge Schill's experience has shown us that people are very reluctant to come forward if they were sexually abused. And I think that it's even, the percentage is even much, much smaller for men. Men don't want to say that they were abused by other men.
Yeah.
It's a real problem in our society.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about regarding Virginia's book?
With Virginia, despite everything that she had been through when she was sent to Thailand, she did not want to take that girl back to the United States to be abused by Epstein and Maxwell. And I think that that really shows that regardless of the abuse and the trauma, that there was a very, very good soul there. And when I got to know Virginia, she struck me as a very good person. And I knew that she'd had a lot of abuse, and a lot of times that type of abuse results in dissociative identity disorder, DID. And I kind of felt that. I've been researching and writing about child trafficking for like 22, 23 years, and I can kind of get the feel of someone who has DID. I'm not 100% on it, but I felt that she definitely had dissociative identity disorder. And the troubling thing for me in that book is her husband, when she was in Thailand, her husband to be liberated her. And he came across as like a Prince Charming. I was talking to her once, and she had said that her husband was I don't know, being difficult or angry. And but he appears to be a Prince Charming, and in her book, she keeps her guard up and doesn't really say anything negative about him. But all you got to do is look at that one picture of her that she took, and that's what he became. I mean, we don't know, was he beating on her the whole time, or was that something that just kind of devolved? Unfortunately, we don't have the answer to that, but I hope that one day we'll get the answer to that. Yeah. But what she did was pretty amazing. Yeah. She took on Ghislaine Maxwell and her reptilian lawyers. She took on Alan Dershowitz, who's reptilian himself, Prince Andrew. She really was a beacon for victims of sexual abuse. Yeah. And the irony is, it was her husband, the trauma caused by her husband, that was the critical mass in her taking her life.
And that was, I believe it's been suggested that was because she had lost custody of her children. And obviously, I mean, in the book and elsewhere, her children are obviously the most important thing to her in her life. And I guess that may have played a really big role in that ending.
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand in that situation is that he preempted her by going to a magistrate and getting custody of the kids before she had a chance to. That's what I understand. I don't know what the kids' some of the kids were later teens. I don't know what was happening with them at that time. I do believe for her, she waffled on Alan Dershowitz. She had said that I believe that Alan Dershowitz had molested her 6 times, and she waffled on that. And I believe that Alan Dershowitz had some kind of leverage over her. And when I look at her family, her father and her mother, especially her father, it'd be very easy to get leverage over her because of her father. And possibly her husband, too. It would be very easy to get leverage over her because of her husband. So I do not know why she waffled on Alan Dershowitz. I wish I did. I asked one of her attorneys, and of course, he wasn't willing to tell me.
Yeah,
But she was quite a fighter.
absolutely. Yeah, it was. I noticed in following the news reports lately, following her death, that just to give some insight into the situation with her husband as well, that there seems to be a big fight over the money that she left behind. I mean, obviously, Virginia did get a number of different settlements from various alleged perpetrators and banks, etc. So she left behind a substantial sum of money, and her husband, I believe, is fighting against her two brothers who want that money to go to her children. So, if that gives any insight.
I in the Australian legal system, the money generally goes to the spouse, and for siblings to intervene and get money before the spouse, or money that the spouse thought was earmarked towards him, it's going to be a hell of a battle in
Yeah.
Australia.
No,
Those,
I think the
the
siblings
laws
want
are
the
different
money.
here.
I think the siblings are wanting the money to go to the children.
Yes.
I could be wrong, but they're not trying to get it for themselves, from what I
No.
understand.
Yes.
Yeah,
But because of Australia's legal system, that's going to be tough to circumvent.
definitely. Um, So in going back a little bit to Ehud Barak, but moving on from Virginia's book, I wanted to talk to you about the recent news from Drop Site News. They published, I mean, there had been some leaked emails earlier on I believe this year that were leaked, that were hacked. And Drop Site News has gone through them and found a number of interesting ones between Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein that seem to show some, efforts to coordinate on Epstein's part, like on behalf of Israel in regards to Mongolia, in regards to Syria. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And does that answer the question for us as to whether Epstein was working with and for Israeli intelligence?
The people that hacked the emails were called Handala,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a pro-Palestinian hacking group. And they were ultimately posted by uh, Distributed Denial of Secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And I downloaded them. I haven't gone through all of them myself, but I did find a few that were incriminating. But Dropsite News has really gone through them, and with Syria, it's kind of mind-boggling. Uh, Epstein acted as a broker between Ehud Barak and Putin, because the Israelis really wanted to out Assad of Syria because they thought that he was way too warlike and had way too much antipathy towards Israel. So Israel wanted him out. And according to these emails, Epstein played a role in that. The Russians, Putin ultimately decided that he was cool with Assad being in Syria, but there's an email. I mean, and the emails are, I mean, it's a trove of emails. It's from 2013 to 2016, years after Epstein as a registered sex offender. So that wasn't even a speed bump. I mean, Ehud Barak has done his best. Say, I barely knew him, and we got together a few times. But I mean, these emails kind of nail it. And there's an email from Ehud Barak to Epstein on May 9th, 2013, Rahul Barak says, "Are you awake? If, please call." And Rahul Barak says, "Jeff, please don't share this info with any of our friends." So it's about Russia. And Epstein replies, "Of course not. I think you should let Putin know you will be in Moscow. So if he wants private time." So you've got the former prime minister of Israel and the former head of Israeli intelligence talking to Epstein, emailing with Epstein about these geopolitical moves that they want to make, where Epstein is somehow helping, I believe that Epstein is somehow helping Barack facilitate a negotiation with Putin. And obviously, Putin and Israel couldn't come together on that because Putin was going to back Assad. So, but that's, and I think that the connection with Mongolia is pretty amazing. I think there's a lot more meat there.
Yeah, do you want to discuss what that was about just a little bit?
So that was about Ehud Barak had developed or was part of a company that provided spyware, and the deal was Epstein was trying to get Ehud Barak to Mongolia and for Mongolia to buy the things that Ehud Barak was selling because of his country. And what's kind of amazing is he got the International Peace Institute involved, and that was started by someone who is affiliated with the UN, and it's quite an organization. And from the International Peace Institute came the Mongolian Advisory Agreement Board, and the Mongolian Advisement Agreement Board was, I mean, it had some very interesting people, including Epstein. He conscripted Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard until he said that women weren't innately benefited by with the ability to do math and science, which caused him some problems. But even before then, Larry Summers had instituted the or been part of the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which separated commercial bank from speculative banks, and that's all. And that was passed by Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 because that's one of the things that caused the Depression. So that had been in place until Clinton and Summers, and then they got repealed, and that led to the financial meltdown of 2008 because these banks just started speculating. It was really crazy what they came up with derivatives. I mean, it was the biggest casino in the world. Wall Street became the biggest casino in the world. So Epstein gets Larry Summers. Well, it's started by Ehud Barak and Jeffrey Epstein. They're working together. They want to get Ehud Barak into Mongolia, and so Mongolia starts buying, as I said earlier, his spyware. But the people that he got involved with this are pretty amazing. The advisory board consisted of the Mongolian president, the Mongolian national security advisor, and Larry Summers, and Kevin Rudd, the former prime minister of Australia, and Kjell Bondevik, the former prime minister of Norway. So Epstein has hooked up three prime ministers, one from Norway, one from Australia, and one from Israel to be part of this. And those connections are pretty stratospheric to be able to do something like that. And that was all done so Ehud Barak could go into Mongolia and peddle the things that he wanted to peddle. And then Mongolia has a lot of natural resources, and I'm sure Israel wanted to tap into that too. But that was put together by Epstein, which is kind of amazing. And everybody that was part of that board was given $100,000 to sit down. And they had dinner at Epstein's house one night. Or a number of them did. And these things that are coming out about Epstein now, it's beyond pedophilic pandering and child molestation. It shows that he had connections to Mount Olympus. He could put together 3 prime ministers in a room to talk to each other with a president of a sovereign country and his national security advisor. That's pretty mind-boggling when you think about it, that he had those kind of connections. And I think that it was those kind of connections that enabled him to skate on all the child abuse until 2019.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to me, just as an outsider looking in, I think that it seems pretty beyond question at this point that he was working on behalf of intelligence with all the disparate pieces of evidence that we do have. I mean, in these leaked emails, obviously this was never meant to become public, and we don't know what other activities he got up to like this, but this is one little picture, one little glimpse into what he was doing. It is really significant.
And then he met with James Burns, who would become the director of the CIA after he had been a registered sex offender and before Burns had become director of the CIA. Now, why is the director of the CIA meeting with a registered sex offender? And Burns was asked about that, and he said Epstein was helping him with his taxes. And Leon Black, who gave Epstein $160 million, was asked about that. And he said Epstein was helping him with his taxes. Now, a guy like Leon Black, I mean, he's an unsavory pedophile, but a guy like that has a battalion of accountants. So he doesn't have to pay more than a penny of tax than he needs to. So to come up with something that disingenuous is kind of mind-boggling to me. But a number of media went with it, that Epstein was helping Leon Black with his taxes. And then you've got Les Wexner. And this is Vanity Fair, because Les Wexner gave Epstein power of attorney over his vast empire. And he was certainly a billionaire by then in 1991. And Vanity Fair essentially said that the reason why Les Wexner gave Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney over his empire was because he was lonely. I mean, you can't make this up. But I initially thought that this was all blackmail. That's what I initially thought. And I think that some of it certainly might be. But I think he was laundering money. I mean, that's what I really believe, is that he was laundering money. And the case with JP Morgan, I think, really shows that Jeffrey Epstein was using JP Morgan to launder money.
Yeah, tell us more about that. I know that there's been some very recent news about Epstein's relationship with Wall Street, including JP Morgan and suspicious activity reports. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So Jess Staley was the CEO of JP Morgan's investment bank, the speculative side of JP Morgan. And he was, and Epstein was pandering, well, women to him that we know of. And there was a woman who won in a class action suit that said that she had been sexually abused by Epstein, and that Epstein had pandered her to the CEO of JP Morgan's investment bank, Jess Staley. And Jess Staley even admitted to that Jeffrey Epstein had pandered a woman to him. Now, that's in complete contradiction to what the FBI and Department of Justice are saying, that Jeffrey Epstein never pandered anyone and that all those victims are him and Maxwell. I mean, that's such a load of bunk. And the Trump administration wants us to believe that. I, I mean, there was a poll by CBS that found that 89% of Americans want full transparency with Epstein. 89%. So now what we have is the Trump administration and the Congress going against the will of 89% of Americans, which happens all the time. And this is something that as Americans we have to get a handle on. When the perpetual wars were going on in the Mideast, 80% of Americans at a certain point wanted out. The Bush administration was able to sell 80% of Americans on the war, but then at a certain point, 80% of Americans wanted out, and the wars just kept on going. The Americans didn't want to bail out the banks during the 2008 meltdown, but they did. And with Obamacare, the majority of Americans wanted a single payer system. And Obama had the House and the Senate, and he could have easily have gotten a single payer system instead of bringing this weird healthcare system together that's composed all of HMOs, big and small. But I think with Epstein, it's a little different because we are talking about child molestation. And Americans, I think, are kind of used to being burned by their government, but this is a whole different level of being burned because our government is allowing the abuse of children, the cover up of the abuse of children, which is aiding and abetting. So our government right now, as long as it's covering up Epstein, is aiding and abetting child trafficking. And then Thomas Massie, who's really held the torch, and he started the discharge petition, which we can get into if you want. Trump is having wealthy people, affluent people, back his opponents because Massie won't back down about Epstein. And Mike Johnson is a pathological liar. I mean, he shut down the House early, so it couldn't vote on Massie's discharge bill. And then he's not reconvening the House. And then in the interim, he said that Donald Trump was an FBI informant, working for the FBI, informing on Jeffrey Epstein. And that was so absurd, he had to walk it back. But Mike Johnson, that little twit, that pathological liar, he's the third most powerful man in our country. The Speaker of the House is the third most powerful man in our country. So that's what we've got leading us.
And I think
it's pretty heinous.
It stings a little bit more, I think, for especially the conservatives, the MAGA contingent. I mean, it's one thing to have Biden in office and to have nothing done on Epstein, but to have somebody like Trump and his whole slew of, people in his retinue, the Kash Patels, the Dan Bonginos, who literally talked up how they were going to release the Epstein files, to turn around and say there's nothing in them, for Kash Patel to say that Epstein trafficked to himself along with Ghislaine, just to themselves, that there were no other perpetrators. It really, I think it's mind-boggling. It really galls people.
I believe the toothpaste is out of the tube with Epstein. And I think only truth is going to be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube, which to me is a major victory. I've been at this for 22, 23 years. I started in 2002, 2003 with the Franklin scandal. And I was trying to tell publishers and editors about the Franklin scandal, and no one was willing to listen to me. And when I put Epstein's flight logs and Black Book on the internet, barely made a ripple. And there were only two, I mean, a number of news organizations commented on it, but only two approached me, or actually only one approached me for how I got it and what it says, what it means. But I was, although I ushered that to national consciousness, I was completely cut out. They wanted nothing to do with me. When I say they, I'm talking about the mainstream media. And a friend of mine was an editor at a very esteemed magazine. And I would give him an article about once a year. He would pitch one of my articles once a year. And at a certain point, his boss took him out for lunch and said, no more Nick Bryant articles. And then there
Why?
was,
Was it
what's it?
just because it was too much?
Yeah, I mean, it entailed too much truth. And I think you're aware of my journalism. I mean, I'm not a sloppy journalist. I'm very precise. And then there was going to be, about 2.5 years ago, there was going to be a big release of Epstein documents.
Yeah.
And CNN contacted me. And I talked to the producer, and he said, yeah, you were the guy that released the black book and the flight logs, and we want to see how you feel about this latest cache of documents being released. So he and I were texting throughout the day, and I was going to go in that night. I live in New York City and kind of the heart of it all. And I said to him, the last thing I texted was, oh, I'd like to talk about Epstein Justice, this organization that I started that wants justice on behalf of the Epstein victims. And then within 5 or 10 minutes, I got a text back saying, Nick, we're going to go another way. Now, things like that have happened to me quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. But I mean, I do think that is the one sliver of good news out of this whole story, is that the public obviously is aware of this issue now, that they are angry about it. You've gotten a lot more airtime on a lot of different podcasts and alternative media type spaces where you've been able to speak to, millions of people at this point, probably. So that's one small victory, is that, as you say, the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. There's no way to cover it up now.
And that's a huge victory. I was walking around Greenwich Village a while back, and I heard a guy screaming, "You were right! You were right! You were right!" And it was a friend of mine. Because when I started investigating Franklin, some of my friends completely thought I lost my mind. But it was a friend of a friend, and because of Epstein, he realized that what I was writing about in the Franklin scandal actually existed. It was a real phenomenon. So that was great. And I've had other people approach me because it was tough at first. I mean, I couldn't. Some of my friends thought that I'd lost my mind, and that really kind of hurt. I mean, I lost some friends over Franklin.
Which is shocking, because you document everything you write about in the Franklin scandal book. It's all cited and noted, and there are government documents galore. And I mean, it's all very legitimate.
I'm of the people that kind of shunned me because of Franklin. I did have someone who was a television executive make an amends to me because he knew I went through a really hard time after that. And he said to me, I really apologize. I could have been a better friend.
Yeah.
And he's the only one that's made any kind of amends to me, because I wasn't shunned by a lot of people, but I was shunned by some people who I thought were pretty good friends. And I mean, most people knew that if I was going to look into this, and I believed it, that I had evidence. But there were just some people that just, I don't know. Nietzschean, I was a philosophy major, and Nietzschean slave morality kind of addresses that. Nietzsche said that people that go outside their tribe or society or whatever and lash on to something that's very, very different are going to be shunned by the people in their tribe or their society. And we've seen this throughout history because the other people just want to write that off as wishful thinking or fanciful thinking. And Nietzsche called that slave morality. And I'm not a huge fan of Nietzsche, but I do believe that slave morality exists and that I encountered slave morality with the Franklin scandal and with Epstein to a certain degree too.
Yeah. And I mean, in addition to in terms of your journalism, how you were received, I think that the way that the victims or the survivors were received in Franklin versus now, although there are still obviously some critics of Virginia and the other survivors, I can think of a couple of kind of small but loud voices who seem to be critical no matter what evidence is put their way. But those voices are much smaller and more niche this time around. It's not the entire establishment just condemning them. I mean, to the point that Alicia Owen was in solitary confinement at one point because she refused to back down. So yeah, the response to the survivors is improved, if not perfect.
Well, according to state and federal authorities, not a single child was abused by the Franklin Network and the media too.
Yeah,
And that's different with Epstein. I really want to push Epstein Justice. It's a nonprofit organization that
sure.
I started, and people can visit EpsteinJustice.com. And I want these Franklin victims to be vindicated too. I really want them to be vindicated. When I was writing the Franklin scandal and I was finding these victims and interviewing them, I told them all that I was going to do the best job I possibly could to get their story out. And I couldn't get a magazine or a major publisher to touch that story. And I believe that all victims should be vindicated, but I would like to see the Epstein victims vindicated, and I'd really like to see the Franklin victims vindicated. That's that's a major driving concern of mine, is to get those victims vindicated.
So tell us how viewers and listeners can help with that. What can they do to help with the Epstein justice effort?
You can go to EpsteinJustice.com. Once a month, we have a webinar, and you can also join us on Facebook. And we're putting where people are getting designated by state, and this has been a long time coming. This is going to be a grassroots movement. We've got Massey has pledged his support for Epstein justice, but we need a lot more. What we want is an independent congressional commission, which is different than what Massey and Ro Khanna are pushing for now. They've introduced the discharge petition, and they're looking for the 218th vote, which they have because of that Arizona representative that was elected, and she will be the 218th signature. But Mike Johnson is doing everything he can to postpone Congress from opening, so there isn't the 218th. But if the discharge petition gets 218 votes, which it should, then it has to go to the House. And then it's got to get 218 votes in the House. It's got to get a majority in the House. And then it would go to Senate Majority Leader John Thune, and he's expressed skepticism and cynicism about what Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna are doing. And he could kill it by himself. I mean, there'd be some public pressure on him, but he could kill it by himself. But if it makes it past Thune, then it would go to a vote in the Senate, and that would have to be signed by Donald Trump, which is never going to happen. what we're proposing is an independent congressional commission. We're going to need a majority in the House, so we're going to need a majority in the Senate. And we've seen that there are a lot of people in the House and a lot of people in the Senate that want to vote for this. And we're not going to need an executive signature, because these investigations can be done just by Congress. And a number of times with independent congressional commissions, there isn't any politicians involved at all. The issue is given to investigators to look at. And I think that it's the only way that we're going to get the truth with Epstein. And we're a long way from that happening, but I think it can happen. It's really up to people wanting to do something about it. But what we have is what Trump is protecting. He might be protecting himself, but he's also protecting a very compromised political system. And as long as we have that compromised political system, our government isn't going to adhere to 89% of the Americans' will. I mean, it's going to do whatever it wants to do because of its masters. And this is something that we can reverse in our lifetimes. This will be the best opportunity in our lifetimes to clean out our political system. And this might be the best opportunity ever for us to clean out our political system before our leaders take us off a cliff. And Epstein Justice, we need help, we need donations, but we're very committed. And you can go to EpsteinJustice.com and check out everything that we're doing and sign up for a webinar. And we can do this. It's not rainbow and granola. It's something that's feasible.
Absolutely. And it's so important to do because, as you're saying, it's the thread that when you pull on it, it just unravels everything from the intelligence community being corrupt to international intelligence, to the influence of Israel in our government, to the plutocracy and the corruption of oligarchs. I mean, in every establishment institution, as Virginia's book describes, just the whole thing. It's incredible. So that's why it is so important. And thank you so much for coming on.